Hello, ladies. I am so happy to have you with us here today. We are speaking with Deanna. And let me tell you, she has a really awesome story. It goes along with some of the topics we've already talked about with some other superwomen in other episodes. But if this is your first episode, it'll still make sense. We are going to talk about adoption. We're going to talk about homeschooling and how to have a long lasting marriage. All things I've been super curious to learn more about. So thank you for coming on with us today.
It is a pleasure to be here and to connect with someone who may have my story, who may not be, walking confidently. And I'm hoping this blesses them.
Well, we're excited to have you. Right before we came on, we were talking about just wording. And I know that's something that as a community we're very mindful of, just to make sure that we're not unintentionally hurting someone. And I say unintentionally because I know we do it all the time. And we wouldn't sit down and purposely, say something mean. And so we recently spoke with a lady who had adopted a 3 week old. And she mentioned that her friend circle would look at the baby and then look at her and go, oh my God, I can't believe someone gave her away. Like it was a negative, bad thing. And so I was so happy to have Deanna here to tell the other side of that, where we might need to change our frame where she was gifted versus given away. It just, because the story, here's the other side of the story from a birth mom. So we're happy to have you with us.
So awesome. Where would you like me to start? Do you have any specific point that we want to start at, or just start from the beginning?
Wherever. To start from the beginning, because I know how it is. Like stories run parallel at times, and then one of them leads to the other. So wherever you're comfortable starting.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting that we're starting at my adoptive story because it started in this little hometown that I'm standing in right now. I'm actually standing in a little town called Goodrich, North Dakota. And maybe 100 people, it might have been 250 when I was here 36 odd years ago, 40 years ago. There, I'm dating myself. But my story starts with being raised in this little community. I was just telling my sister on a walk this morning that we were raised with in a German community. I mean, it's not authentic German, but a lot of Germans, Norwegians, that Scandinavian background and upbringing. And it wasn't negative. It wasn't, horrible, abusive, anything like that. But the word love wasn't spoken. Not a lot of hugs and affirmations and speaking words over people. They're very stoic and they keep to themselves. But yet, like when somebody passes away and they've got fields to combine, you will see massive amounts of combines and trucks just pour on. That's how they pour love. They show it in action and bringing food. The food is amazing, and
Anything
so
with food.
that's the background that I grew up in this little town. And so when I graduated high school, I went to a bigger town, maybe an hour away. It wasn't that, far away, but it was the big city. And I had my freedom and took it with abandon. So I went to college and just made some really stupid choices, just went down the route of partying, drinking, carousing. I'll just say carousing and not making good choices at all. And I don't know, a few months later, I discovered that carousing, I ended up being pregnant. I was 18 at the time, and I was actually going to Boston to be a nanny. And what's really funny is because I'm not a children person, or I wasn't back then. And so I go and be a nanny. There's a step in Providence or something, but just continued to party while I was out in Boston, and came back home and had to face the facts. I mean, I came back, middle of August and went, this baby's going to be due probably January-ish. I was guessing, hadn't done any medical anything. And so I thought to myself, my mom raised me when she was 19 and in the system and in, we could probably call it poverty. And we, slowly came out of that. But it was a long haul, and I know it was hard on my mom. And so I consulted an adoption agency in this town that I went to college in, and walked through that process. And of course, the adoption lady said, "Have you told your parents yet?" No. So that was a big step coming back to this little town that I'm standing in right now, and sitting around the farm table, the kitchen table at the farm, and making the news. And of course, Dad wanted to kill the boy, and Mom said, Mom said that she was willing, to raise the baby, and I said, "No, that's not fair. That's not fair to my parents to raise another generation after my siblings, and then, it's not fair to the baby. I wanted just better for the child that I was housing. We can call it that. But So I went through those steps and went through the preparatory, medically, emotionally. We went through some counseling and walked through it. It still wasn't easy, on the day of birth and at that, like you said, 3.5, 4 week mark when baby goes to the new home. It was hard, weeping, crying. No, not gnashing of teeth, but weeping and crying, and just walked through. It was grief therapy, loss therapy, because that's what you're doing. I can't compare it to, anything else, but, like, when you lose someone in death, they're gone. When you lose someone in life, it's similar maybe to divorce. I've never walked through that, but you know that they're going on and moving on and you're not a part of it. So it's a different feeling. But then I had to come back, to my little hometown and face everybody in the face. You go to church, you go to, whatever different functions, and it's an embarrassment. Back then it was what was the phrase? The stigma and the shame. And I walked through that, but it was that era. This was the early '90s. It was that era of that transition of it was embarrassing to be a single pregnant mom to, now it seems normal. But this was that transition period, and it was still kind of a shameful thing in our little town. However, there were two other families. One of them was a church deacon, another one was our superintendent in town. They were adopting babies at the same time that I was giving mine up. So the town, our people, they got to see both sides. They got to see the blessing of receiving a baby and the blessing of, like you say, gifting a baby. And so from there, you'd think, you'd turn your way around, turn yourself around and, make better choices because I knew I made horrible choices. I had a couple more, rowdy years in me. Thankfully, God protected me from anything more, whether it be, more pregnancies, more, sexual stuff, diseases. I'm just so grateful for that. And met my husband, moved to, where was I? I was in North Dakota, so I moved to South Dakota, moved to Minneapolis for a few months, and then moved to South Dakota. Did some working there and met my husband. We got married, and the rest is history, but it's part of my story. So the story is, like you said, we go from adoption to homeschooling. So
Exactly.
like I said, when I was before I had this baby, I was the person, or even after I had the baby too, I was the person that would be in the Walmart aisles, the Target aisles, the grocery store aisles. I would hear children screaming from the other side or, throwing their fits, something I had to walk through when I had children. But I would hear those people, those kids throwing fits. I would be the one. I was the one that yelled, "Shut your kid up." I was that person. I was so bitter and negative and angry, and that's what I took into, our first few years of marriage, because of my background, my history, my walk through. I mean, you go through counseling and grief and everything like that, but there's stuff still in there. And when you're still, free and single, I thought, it was all about me and walking through that selfishness phase. So when we decided to have children, I was just, very, okay, I'll have children. I was like, and then pregnancies were tough, and I was just like, I just didn't like it. And so we had two children. And when my son was 3, we had him actually enrolled. I actually still have the paperwork where I enrolled him in a preschool. And it was the same school that my husband's sister's daughters had gone to. And I had the paperwork already. And then God brings into my life a homeschool mom with 3 children, 4 children, and 1 more on the way. And her house was just peaceful. And I went, I want that. How do you have that with 4 kids and 1 on the way? And so we got to be friends. And then it's interesting too, listening to the radio. I listened to Focus on the Family a lot as I was, walking through new mom, little toddlers, going crazy in the mind. And all that week was talk about homeschooling. So I was called and committed, convicted that I needed to be homeschooling my kids. And it's funny because when I told my family, they went, "What? You don't even like kids." I'm like, "I know. And now I'm going to spend 24/7 with them instead of sending them off to school." So it's quite the funny. So we go from the weeping and the grief to, laughing about it. And that's kind of my forward momentum in life is finding things to laugh at. Weep when we need to weep and laugh when we. So anyway, we went through homeschooling, and of course every year was a trial and a journey and growth. We went to a homeschool graduation ceremony probably when the kids were about ninth, 10th grade, something like that, because we were getting into that graduation and tracking credits and things like that. So I was, changing and adapting and learning new skills. And we sat at that ceremony, and the mom that spoke, she says, "What if God called you to homeschool? Not for your kids, but for you." And holy cow, was that utter conviction. The things that, I grew and I learned and developed, I mean, and just learning that piece when the kids, but when my husband and I first met, I was just kind of starting to get back into reading the Bible. And I knew I didn't have patience. So I prayed for patience. And be careful what you pray for because God will bring you things that will try and test you to get patience. So he brought me a husband. And then I prayed for patience, more patience. And he brought me children. And then he called me to homeschool. So do be careful what you pray for. God has
Oh,
a sense of humor. And patience will come with tests and trials, and I hope they are something that you can handle. God won't bring you anything that you can't handle. And obviously, children were my step up in learning patience and everything else, and learning a new pace in life. And I'll bring up pace a little bit later when we talk about that. So there's my story from adoption, or gifting my baby up for adoption, and then homeschooling, being called to homeschool my children. So getting out of the child bear or child rearing and right into it and slamming into it. And to this day, I mean, my kids are 27 and 25, and we talk weekly, if not even more, and just love the relationship that we have. I mean, there were times where we butted heads, and there were times where I was like, "Rah," but we rolled through it, and even just about 2 months ago, not even, maybe 6 weeks ago, my son called. And, your kids get to that aha moment. Mine was at 25 when I realized, oh, my mom was right about a lot of things. And he's 27 and he got to that moment. And apparently he'd been holding out, for quite a while, but he got to that aha moment and he just was, teary and emotional. And he went, "I just want to thank you, both mom and dad, for, investing in me and believing in me and bringing me up and how you did it." And we were all like, whoa, cheering on the phone. And it was great. So for moms and dads who are in that struggle with their kids where they think they know it all, there is a time that it will come. It will come full circle. If you keep planting and preparing them and supporting them, loving them, telling them you love them. That's key. I didn't have that. And I wanted to break that cycle. Absolutely.
wow. There's so many things that like come to mind right now with your story, but the most paramount one is why was it so peaceful homeschooling? What about that makes it peaceful?
It's the discipline. It is the really hard discipline for yourself and for disciplining your children. I'm not going to say what's right or wrong. I'm going to tell you what I did and what works, and it's biblical. But and I didn't bring up the Bible verses to reference, so I apologize about that. So we can pull them up another time. But one thing is getting ourselves under control when we're disciplining our children. And I read a book, and I didn't bring that book up because I wasn't prepared for this one, but a book that I learned from, I want to say, not even Quakers or Hutterites, but something in that faith. And read the book about getting yourself under control before you discipline your children. And we discipline with the rod. And I'm not talking a gigantic rod or the belt or anything like that, but we discipline with the rod. And we talked about where their error was, appropriately responded, and talked about afterwards, hugged, and supported them, and said, "I love you, and I want you to be better than that, and I want you to obey me." Very simple, but very, you got to focus on it. I remember there were weeks where we would hit a wall, and a lot of times they were emulating me. I could see it. When there's a time when you're parenting and you go, they're doing exactly how I was acting 2 weeks ago. So they see what you're doing, and then they're acting it out. And so we would take a whole week off of school, off of learning, off of whatever, and just focus on discipline and obedience. And that's that was where I learned a lot of peace. Where I hope my children learned a little bit of peace. But with life comes the pace that we run, and that peace sometimes falls away. So we have to reset ourselves. But yeah, I would take a week and just focus on discipline and obedience.
And it's great with homeschooling, you have the freedom, the bandwidth to really meet life where it is. That's kind of how I was with COVID. Our daughter was going through a growth spurt right then and kind of a realignment with her education. And it was just perfect that we'd gotten this kind of breath in the universe to let those two things happen at the time they needed to happen. And that's kind of what I hear in your story was instead of having to keep this race, like, okay, we got to be up at 7, be at school at 8, we got to you could say, "No, pause. We're gonna take care of this situation right now." And that really makes so much sense, and there was something else you said about, kind of the discipline that you hug them. I heard another mom talk about that and how important it is after you've, kinda like in the corporate world, we're talking about build, break, build. You tell them what they did that wasn't cool and then hug to, physically reinforce, and I still love you. I love that you mentioned that because 'cause it's been a long time since we've talked about that.
And it's been a long time since I've done it.
And that your boys, that your children, they let you know after the fact, "Hey, that worked. I love you. I appreciate what you did," versus 7 years in counseling and the story is one of estrangement, and the only way you can talk to them is through their therapist, and, that's gotta make you feel good too, that
Yeah,
you
it
did what.
does. Absolutely. What else can we visit about and talk about? One of the things that I've got a note on is when I was building at home businesses in the middle of homeschool
Mhm.
too. So I don't know if that's something you want me to touch on.
That and I was just looking at my notes here, didn't you build a log cabin?
We did. Yeah.
I was like, "Did I type that in the wrong notes?" A log cabin, and we were gonna kinda talk a little bit about the talking about pacing and cadence, how you and your husband found a cadence and a pacing to kind of to la how long have you been married now?
September will be 30 years. It's pretty crazy to say that out
Oh,
loud.
wow.
Yeah, and think that, I gave up my daughter at 36 years ago. That was 1990. That was a long time ago. So, yeah, I'd love to talk about the cadence because sometimes I get out of the cadence and my anxiety and my body feels it and my muscles freak out, rest becomes unrestful. But just during homeschooling, I had home businesses. I actually did the payroll for my husband's business and then I was building, network businesses with different products while we were homeschooling. And I miss these days of our slower mornings. And so kind of shifting back into the homeschool part is how I slowed down. Of course, I told you about the week of different focuses, but we would read out loud and we would do it in my bed. So my husband would go off to work and we had a king size bed and the kids would hop in on those mornings that we were just not wanting to get up and get going and stay in our pajamas. And we would do the read alouds. Like said, hey, bring your books in here and let's do the read alouds. Sometimes we just kind of ease into, whatever it was, grammar or whatever, right from the bed. And just, it gave our heads just time to stay horizontal. That's where I kind of revive is when my body is horizontal. But just taking that time to slow down where you can, when you can. This is the time, of the season that might be able to grab an extra day or two and just have a pajama morning and just slow that pace. There's a few songs that I listen to, and I've already forgotten the titles, but to talk about that pace. Breathe, that's what it is by Johnny Diaz. Breathe. I go back. It's an old song, but I just love to remember to take time to breathe. But yeah, we built a log house in the middle of all this. So we've got, businesses going, homeschool going, and building a log house with our hands. I mean, we had a package or a log building crew that set the logs and placed them together and everything and did, I think, the windows. But we did everything else. We did the floors, we did the sheetrock. I hate sheetrock. And our kids were, goodness, what were they, 5 and 7 when we were building this? Yeah, 3 to 7, from yeah, somewhere in there. So it was, 2 to 3 years we were doing this process. And there was a funny story in there that's not related to this, but I just have to share it. So we're on the peak of the house, and we didn't have the decks put in yet. So it was like a 2-story high up. And my husband rented one of those man lifts, and we were going up to, I can't remember what we were doing. If we were caulking, if we were spraying, whatever. And the man lift went out of balance while we were up on it, and you have to manually run it from the bottom. We're both up in it and it starts to beep. We can't maneuver it from up top. And it's beeping and we're out of balance where we can't get down, we can't move it, and we're stuck up there. So we're on the top of the roof. And so my husband leans over. We got the kids inside because when we go out to do projects, we put on a show for them to watch, and they would just get engulfed in it because we didn't do a lot of televisions. And so they were getting engulfed. So my husband's kicking the glass door trying to get their attention to, at least come around and whatever, do something from the bottom. they weren't paying attention at all. So we ended up having my husband had to rappel with a tie down strap from that and then jump the rest of the way. So he had to go rappel down one story and then jump the rest of the story. It was crazy. But these are the things, those silly stories from, the crazy days and the busy chaos of home building. So if you're in the middle of home building, I feel your pain because I've been there, and even just home projects, it's challenging. But one of the things that my husband and I did, we talk about pace and staying married this long, is learning how to take time away and how to take time for yourself, take time for each child, and being able to, take them one on one, take time for, dad to be with each child and, different skills, activities, and of course, time away with your husband. And our unplugged time, this may seem kind of silly, but maybe you have one and you go, oh, I never thought about that. We installed in our log house a double sized call it a bubble tub, a jet tub. And so we would, be able to sit face to face, feet to face, whatever it is. And on those days where he would come home and just be exhausted and just fed up with, work and we need to get away, we, set the kids up with, whatever activity or a meal. And we'd go sit in the tub and just unwind and hash it out. And he would be able to, bring his frustrations. We'd try to solve them. I'd bring my frustrations, but we just leave it all in the tub. And of course, it was relaxing, hot water and jet tubs. And it was just that little bit of time. I mean, it was probably the 45 minutes, but it was just that enough time to unwind and be by ourselves. And another thing that I do that I made a note for myself is I know there are so many moms out there that are running frantically from kids activities from, summer, fall, spring, winter. It's year round. It's just a matter of shifting it. And I know there's travel sports that will take you, across the state and, hours and hundreds and thousands of dollars in sports fees and travel expenses. We limited our kids to 1 to 2 activities. Yep. So my daughter was violin and my husband calls it curtain climbing. It's not curtain climbing, silks. It's doing that silk sport, curtain climbing. That's the thing that always came to my mind. But those were her 2 activities, and my son was taekwondo and piano, and that was it. And in the summertime, we'd kinda, just kinda flex with, different fun things, but I was usually a part of it. And that kept my sanity. That's
Mhm.
what keeps your sanity is not running 4,000 miles an hour with 800,000 things. Your kids need to have time to be kids. They need to have time to breathe. They need to see that example so they don't take that pace into their work pace and burn out. And I've called my son out on it a few times. I'm like, you got to take some time for yourself. You've got all this PTO accumulated. I know you're single, but you still got to take time to breathe. Work can't involve or evolve your whole being. You've got to take time to be outside and take a breath. And that's just super important.
I think our culture really makes that the busy a badge that people want to wear, and unlike so many other countries where they really make going on holiday a badge, whereas I think it's kind of not necessarily outwardly shunned, but people are like, oh well, he's on vacation again, must be nice to, there's those kind of conversations. So it is so good that you bring that up, and kind of with that kind of transition, what are you doing now? Like, what are your days like now?
Absolutely. Since homeschooling my kids, I went back to work full time and just kind of adjusted with different positions. And now I work as a regional director for a nonprofit organization that where I support grassroots volunteers in connecting with their state legislators to propose some amendments. And we're just working on building that in 7 states that I support. With that, of course, I've got a flexible schedule because it's online work, or I don't like to say online work, but it's remote work until I travel. So right now, I'm actually standing in my region that I support, and I'm traveling and meeting face to face. So it's fun instead of doing Zoom all the time. But I always start my days with quiet time, walk, read, pray, and learning how to slow down and listen and trying to not avoid conflict, but not stir it up, not be purposely defending or offending, and just being more attentive. Like you said, words are important, but just it's great to be working with people again instead of systems or technical stuff. And just love doing that.
Now, if folks are listening and they hear themselves in your story, where can they look online to learn more about you, find your resources, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Everything is pretty easy if you just remember how to spell my name, which is on the screen. So Facebook, it's at Deanna Becket, facebook.com/Deanna Becket, two N's, one T. Instagram, same thing. TikTok, same thing. Let's see. LinkedIn, same thing. You can find my full name. It's really beneficial when you've got, uh, I mean, whatever name you have, get on social media earlier and snag your name so that you don't
Uh-huh.
miss it. And then, of course, website is same thing, deannabecket.com. So the key is just remembering 2 N's, 1 T.
I love it. Someone, I forget, posted a meme online that said, "Oh, how did you get your email address as your name?" Because usually it's, 01 at the end or, dot or something. And it's like, I was here when the internet was created. Like I was here. So that's really funny how that kind of is. And so what do you have working on in the future? What do you have up your sleeve that we're yet to learn about?
My goodness, I just published a new book and just continuing to stay peaceful, stay that pace and, look at conversations and communication, learning, growing, continuing to just keep the anxiety off my shoulders, keep that stress off my shoulders. There is a phrase that I wanted to share with everybody that I use. I learned it from a social media coach, but it works in anything. Social media works with other communications, family, friends. It's called slow down to speed up. Slow down to speed up. So when we slow down enough, stop rushing, slow down to read the document, I'll actually find the spot that says click here for whatever it is. Because a lot of times, you're reading something and then you send someone a message. I don't know. I can't find what you need here. You go back and slow down and go, I was an idiot. I didn't read the full thing. But just taking that time to read, breathe, listen to the conversation and not be thinking of what we're going to say next. And, something I'm doing, looking forward to as well is being outside more, enjoying nature while the temperatures are nice. And, we left Florida for the summer and it is so sticky and gross there. And I'm so excited to not be in that and being able to be outside a little bit more instead of stuck in the air conditioning. So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to.
I love that. And we will drop all of her contact in the show notes for y'all. So if you're busy doing something right now, don't feel panic trying to get it done. But I was so happy when we connected. And I was even happier when Deanna was okay sharing her whole story because it really balances some of the other side of the story that we've heard from other women. And I think as a community, you know better when you do better and we grow together. And the only way we can do that is to hear each other's stories so that when we find ourselves on one side of the story, we've kind of heard the voice from someone else on the other side. It's such a gift. We call it a tuition paid pass because you don't have to live through all these life experiences to have heard firsthand from someone the pros, the cons, the what they would do different, the how they could improve, or what was just really cool about it. So I love that. So with that, Deanna, what do you want to leave our listeners with today?
Got a couple of things that I prepared. I like how you said learn from other people. I call it OPM, other people's mistakes. And we're going to make our own. The goal is to grow and learn and live from our mistakes, but learn from my mistakes. Just, wait for marriage, do it the right way and take time to breathe and slow down. But I laughed how not laughed, but inside I giggled when you mentioned, my goodness, I have to look it up, the badge, because that phrase that I shared, slow down to speed up. My question is, when did busy become a badge? When did fast become the goal? And how is that working for our marriage, our kids, and our peace of mind? And what are we actually rushing toward? What if the life you're trying to get to is already right in front of you and we're moving too fast to see it? And I know it sounds completely backwards, but here's what 30 years of marriage, a log home we built with our hands, and of course, kids we homeschooled in the beautiful chaos. And here's what it taught me: the rushed version of you gets less done. It loves worse and runs out of gas by Thursday. The slowed down version, she finishes, she stays married, she stays sane. So I encourage everyone to pick one place this week where you're going to deliberately slow down. One email you might be sitting with before sending, one conversation you will have instead of a text. Where are we going to pick up the phone? Or where one night where dinner is slower than usual. Just one, and watch what speeds up. And there's so many more, little nuggets of truth and things that I could share with you. But if that's just one where you can slow down just 5 minutes, that's going to change your life. If the pace that you're running at is causing chaos in your life or tense shoulders, headaches, and, you know, there's so much that goes with stress. I have learned about stress in the past 3 to 5 years that I've changed my diet, changed everything. And it is like I got up at 6 a.m. yesterday and I was still awake at 11:30. And I went, why am I still awake? This is just crazy. And I just went, it's how God directed me to take care of my body. And now I can get more done in the day and get more done for Him.
I love that. And I love how just succinct you were with delivering it because it's true. When we go so fast, I think we spin around the same thing 4 times versus just moving through in a controlled way, which does make us a lot more exhausted. And it does. We've been talking a lot about just your whole body, your mind, your body, your soul, like the physical body, your mind, your soul, like your emotions, and how they really can impact each other. It sounds, I think if we talked about this 10 years ago, it would have felt really woo woo. Been like, oh no, your mind can't influence your body. What are you talking about? But it really can. And we've heard from so many women who have had bad experiences with their body and have made conscious decisions to make change. And that change happened. So it's definitely not crazy. It's not something. So I was so glad to hear you lay it down like that. And it was such a joy to have you on today and to share your story and the bravery and the vulnerability it takes to tell your story is not lost on me. So I really appreciate it.
Awesome. And another thing people can speak out loud to themselves that you talked about the brain and the body is I am happy, healthy, and whole, mind, body, and soul. What if we just talk that to ourselves every day instead of that internal dialogue of whatever we know what our internal dialogue is? I'm happy, healthy, and whole, mind, body, and soul.
I feel like that needs to be written on like everyone's bathroom mirror with a dry erase marker. Like that little
Exactly.
girl that was standing on her bathroom, like, I am good enough. I'm smart enough. Sometimes I feel like I need her like in my mind. But thank
Yes.
you for tuning in with us today. I hope you took away one thing that helps you feel better about your life, make change where you need to, and to love yourself more. We'll be back again with another episode soon.